The trade and investment connection between India and Africa holds immense promise in the struggle to lift millions out of poverty. Trade between the two is burgeoning, with new opportunities opening after the global pandemic-related slowdown. India is now Africa's third largest trading partner, accounting for 6.4% of African total trade, for a total value of $62.6 billion in 2017 to 2018. Many initiatives are private sector led and have injected vitality into India and Africa's historical bond. India's Africa policy was solidified by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. As India seeks to raise its global profile, Africa is both a conduit and an outlet for its aims. Rajinder Singh Bhatia, President and CEO, Kalyani Group. Harsha Bangari is the Deputy Managing Director at Exim Bank. Rakesh Jha is partner at Seven Advisors Private Limited. And Datsuko Toda is Acting Vice President for Agriculture, Human and Social Development at the African Development Bank. And the moderator is Nilaya Varma, co-founder and CEO, Primus Partners Private Limited.
And joining us now from India is Nilaya Varma, who's ready to lead us through the discussion on the Indo-Africa bond. Welcome, Nilaya.
Thank you so much and good afternoon, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the session on Capitalizing on India and Africa bond. I think the session's name is really important because personally I've always believed, whether it's institutions, whether it's organizations, or whether it's countries, they tend to partner based upon relationship and bonds. And when it comes to bonds, I think there isn't a much stronger and natural bond between other than India and Africa. I mean, I think you go back to what Nelson Mandela said, and essentially said, India and Africa have been bound by a golden thread for many, many decades. And in fact, that's our common heritage, which inspires us to forge partnerships, not just in bilateral sphere, but also in regional and multilateral domains. We briefly spoke about the Prime Minister in the AV. I think he has said that, I think he was right when he said Africa will be at the top of our priorities, and we continue to intensify and deepen our engagement, and actually laid out 10 principles on how we can bridge, how we can work in that partnership. And in that context, I think we want to look at a trade and investment of $100 billion from about 62 that we currently have. And really, that's what we want to get our panel to share their thoughts about. But before I really get the panel to get talking, I really wanted to make 5 broad points around what we believe is going to drive that partnership, that growth, and that bond leading to more trade and more investment. I think at the heart of everything that lies is strong people-to-people ties that India has with Africa. I mean, many prominent African leaders have studied in various Indian universities. We have about 25,000 African students studying in various public and private universities across India. We've got about 3 million Indian origin living in different parts of Africa, not just in South Africa, but Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda have very large presence of Indian diaspora. I think the second thing, we've already spoken about it, is India is Africa's third largest trading partner, and I think we need to build upon it. I also think the third point that I wanted to make is how do we build on the recent initiatives that we have taken? India has signed a free trade agreement with Mauritius, the first time that it's done in an African country. Out of the 54 African countries, I think India has projects operating in about 48 African countries with 75 projects and about $13 billion of investment. India, along with Japan, also launched the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor Initiative in 2017 to promote development, connectivity, and cooperation. I think, we're living in the times of pandemic, and I think it's an important point that I wanted to make. India has exported about 5.84 crore of COVID-19 vaccines, and a large part to many, many African countries. Incidentally, that amount is more than the Indians who've got who've got the jabs as on date, and how do we build on that relationship that India has with Africa, especially in key areas of agriculture, education, skilling. And finally, the fifth point that I wanted to make before I bring in my panelist is trade. I mean, how do we make the relationship more strategic? And I think one area that really helps drive strategic is defense. And India has a ambitious program for exports and building relationship. And I think African continent is a great example where this relationship can be forged. Um, so let me come quickly and directly to my panelist, and let me start with you, Tsuko. You lead a very important element of African Development Bank dealing with agriculture. I think agriculture is extremely important for both Africa and India. And I think trade, we heard about how logistics is important. So what are your views on how we can strengthen that relationship, especially in context of what African Development Bank is doing?
Thank you so very much, Nilaya. In terms of both the African continent and the Indian subcontinent, the type of growth that you were talking about, the enhanced trade, the fast urbanization, all these point both India and Africa towards global and regional supply chains. And both Africa and India are going through a process of structural transformation, which entails agricultural modernization, industrial upgrading, and technological innovation. All of this requires growth-enhancing investments exactly in rural logistics and markets. Without having infrastructure, logistics, and for example, wholesale markets, it is very difficult to be competitive because the movement of supply chains depends on that. And given the need to focus investments, some of the endeavors that the African Development Bank is now investing in are special agro-industrial processing zones in Africa. This is putting in the infrastructure backbone and the policy institutional ecosystem together to try to get private sector investments, to try to attract more agribusinesses into the rural space. And this experience has also taken place in India with its mega food parks, and trying to balance both the public sector investment with the private sector investment so that we can innovate around that partnership. Thank you.
Absolutely. Clearly investments is something which is going to be critical, especially in infrastructure, to enable the large volumes of trade and investment that we're talking about. And when it comes to investments coming to the India side, I actually wanted to bring in Harsha Bangari. She's the Deputy Managing Director at Exim Bank and plays a key role as far as driving trade and investments between India and Africa. Harsha, my question really is, we've had traditionally looked at a lot of energy-related investment, but given the goal that we have of $100 billion, how do you see Exim's role there and areas that we need to diversify into?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And you answer your question, I think we start from the historic data where India and Africa have always been trade partners even before the sea routes were discovered. Now, coming to your specific question on energy. So as Exim, we are a financial partner, I would say, to Africa. And we also run the economic diplomacy policy of the government of India. So we see African countries as a partner institutions, and we try to finance. So we have huge lines of credit which we have extended to the African countries. Typically, our objective is to be more a partner than a dictator of the use of funds. So although we provide lines of credit to these African governments, we do not really like to influence the purpose of this finance. So typically the borrower countries in different parts of Africa would have different requirements. Maybe it could be power, it could be water, it could be increasingly now going into energy, and we would like more to happen in the renewable energy space. But yeah, I think it will take some time. So there, the Exim Bank provides financing, so that one enabling environment is already there in place. And this also encourages Indian companies to, I would say, wet their feet with these markets. And then subsequently, our experience has been that the Indian companies become more and more comfortable with dealing with African counterparts. And we are hoping that going forward, the commercial trade, without the backing of the governments also could sort of grow. So that is the environment in which we are seeking to operate.
I think it's a very important point, and I just wanted to pick up a couple of things that you said, and I think it will be very relevant. I think in all my experience working across Africa, and I've worked from small states like Lesotho to all the way to South Africa and larger places, I think one thing that we often don't talk about is even in our bilateral agreement, I think India and many of the institutions look at partnership as opposed to bringing in, here is my financing and therefore here are my products. And I think that's really a partnership that we need to build upon and makes a lot of sense. And talking about partnerships, I actually wanted to bring in Colonel Bhatia. Over the last few years, clearly India has been signing a lot of MOUs as far as strategic defense agreements is concerned. I know, Colonel Bhatia, you've been a DA to a couple of African countries as well. I wanted to, get your views around how do you see that element strengthening our relationship with the continent and actually driving more trade and investment?
Thank you, Nilay. Before I really answer your question in a direct answer, I would like to bring out certain points. The first key point is, like you rightly mentioned, there is a golden thread which exists between India and Africa. The key point of that thread is that there is no territorial conflict between the Indian subcontinent or where we are sitting with the African continent. The third point which really stands out is that India is a country which is offering defense trade, and this was mentioned by Exim Bank representative also, that we are offering aid and similarly defense trade without any strings attached, which means that it is not with some conditions. It is going to be a trade which is going to be purely based on need and on the supplier's capability to fulfill it. And the most interesting part is that African continent has systems both from the Western origin and the Russian origin. And Indian industry has actually evolved handling both sets of equipment which have been coming from Western origin and also from the Russian bloc. So my opinion is that we are looking at a target of 100 billion going forward from 62 billion, and defense trade between African continent and India can become a significant driver in bringing this from 62 to 100 billion.
No, absolutely. I think you create a great example of what non-alignment meant for India and how it benefits us as we move forward. But let me bring in Rakesh. And Rakesh, you've had tremendous experience in the financial services sector. You've been in Africa before, apart from many other countries. I think, we've already talked about investment. But we're also talking about not just public investment, but private investment. We're also talking about how innovation in technology can drive a better, collaborations between India and Africa. Just wanted to get your thoughts around those, Rakesh, and how do we fund this large gap?
Sure. Thank you. And that's a very interesting area for discussion as well, because if you look at some of the similarities that we have between the African continent and the Indian subcontinent, that itself will throw up the areas that we need to look at in the future. If you look at the banking sector and the financial sector, it's largely characterized by challenges around financial inclusion on both sides. A big part of our population is excluded from the main banking sector, and also the cost of banking is extremely high. And also the outreach is extremely low. This characterizes the situation on the ground for both sides. And therefore, technology plays a very important role in how do we bridge this gap. Early, I think it was in Kenya where mobile money began to play a very, very important role in bridging this gap. And they were the pioneers, in fact, in setting the trend for what was supposed to come. But I think what is interesting is that the game-changing event happened in Uganda when the industry was able to launch interoperable agent banking platform. which allowed all banks to pool their agents together and create a common platform for all of them where customers could go to any bank's agent and bank anywhere in the country, which really changed the landscape. And I think this is one of the lessons that perhaps India could borrow from Africa also, because India still has an agent platform which is quite independent of each other, and therefore each bank sets up their own agent model, which is quite expensive. And if you look at the cost of borrowing in the markets, structural cost plays a very, very important role. 2/3 of the interest cost that customers pay today is comprising of structural cost, which has to be also dismantled over a period of time, which only technology can play a very important role, whether it is through deployment of robotics or maybe creating shared asset platforms or deployment of blockchain technology. There are many examples of existing projects that India has deployed in their own banks, which can be brought into Africa as a reverse migration. And therefore, that would, in my mind, lead to a situation where the costs that the customers incur today are brought down tremendously, because ultimately inclusion will only happen when low-income groups of population are included in the banking sector and at a cost which is affordable to them. And this is where I think technology innovation will play very, very important from both sides.
Absolutely, Rakesh. I think very well said, and I think the point that you make, and something that I keep listening and believe in, everybody has something to learn and everybody has something to teach. So as we look at India-Africa collaboration and trade, there are a number of things that innovation that's happening in Africa, which is very relevant for India as well. And I think in that context, Atsuko, if I can come back to you, we spoke about financial inclusion as an important thing Rakesh spoke about, but really, the food insecurity or food security, and how can India and Africa collaborate together, given trade, people, knowledge, and the market, to really compete in the global food market? Because I think we have huge potential there.
Thank you very much, Nilaya. I agree. There is huge potential in both the African food market and the Indian food market. What we see is that these food markets are growing. As mentioned, the urbanization, the fast-growing populations, if you compare them to European and US markets, the rate of growth, i.e. the consumption, the demand in these areas, in these urban markets, is just growing exponentially. So number one, if we look at that growth, we can really focus on how do we actually make investments to be able to feed that growth, one. Two, we also see that in terms of competitiveness, India and Africa have lessons to share around agri-infrastructure, agri-logistics, agro-processing, technologies that are applied in primary and secondary agro-industrialization is extremely pertinent. Three, when we look at labor intensity in agro-industry, this is this subsector that really can provide jobs to the youth that we were talking about. And a bit to the point that Rakesh was mentioning, if we can add the digitalization, we are increasing the potential for outreach. So I believe that there are huge opportunities both in India and Africa to increase their trade, but also to take advantage of these ever-growing markets.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that you use the word lessons, and really I wanted to build upon that and actually come back to Harsha and really ask her, given the extensive role Exim has played, to talk about one or two projects and some of the lessons that we have on how we can build on those projects to take the relationship at the next level. And also, perhaps, if I can add, how can we quicken that pace of that engagement and execution?
It's one of my favorite subjects. I think I can go on for hours and hours if I speak about our engagement with Africa, and we are very particularly proud of these engagements. So, of course, as I earlier mentioned, most of the projects in the infrastructure space, of course, we do at the behest of Government of India and with the support of Government of India. But just if I could name a couple of these projects which we have undertaken, or I would say that which we had supported these countries, was one of the power projects which is a hydropower project, Nyaiborongo, which actually now supplies almost 25% of the total power for the country requirement. So these are the projects which are actually are yielding results to these countries. We also do lots of projects on the water segment, water sector, where water and sanitation again is a big requirement for these countries. So that's again, we are very proud to be associated. We are discussing about supply chain. So we believe that infrastructure is very important, because we talk about high cost of doing business with Africa, or we talk about high insurance. So most of these issues which are coming out is either that we do not have enough knowledge. There is an asymmetry of information flow between the two parties who would like to do business with each other. And there I would mention, and I would give my compliments and all the best to IMC and CNBC Africa for setting up this India-Africa desk. And as Exim Bank, we are very proud to be associated with that. So going forward, this would be things. Other than that, what Exim also does is capacity building exercises, where we would like to work with the institutions in the countries, African countries, and try to see if they can develop their own institutional frameworks. We also realize that there's lots of project opportunities in Africa, but again, in terms of skill sets, maybe there's not enough people or enough scope there to know that a project is a project for you, and a project is a project for me as a banker. So that bridge, you have to bridge that gap. And for any project to become financially understandable or comprehensible, we have actually set up a small project development company called Kukuza Project Development Company, which would actually look at project requirements in various parts of Africa, and then try to put things together, including the funding, and ensure that this project goes off the ground. Similar, I was talking about institutional development. So what we have done is, other than dealing with the governments directly, we also have commercial relationships with various importers in Africa, where we do pure commercial lending activities, which allows Indian companies to do more and more business with these African countries. Similarly, we are very proud, and we are associated with African Development Bank, and so are we associated with other institutions like Afri-Exim Bank and Trade Development Bank. So we try to see the point is that as Exim India, although we say that we are very familiar with the African markets, Africa is such a huge continent that it becomes much more easier if we deal through a partner institution in Africa. So we at Exim Bank try to use that channel to get more and more comfortable with these countries, or with the companies in these countries, and ensure that at least the financing should not be a problem if there are any opportunities for Indian companies and for that matter, African companies to partner.
No, absolutely, Arsha. And I think the point that you made of the desk that IMC is setting up would be a really important thing, because I think information asymmetry is one of the big challenges that we have. And I know that we have about 5 minutes left, so let me just bring in a quick Colonel Bhatia. India has, I think Exim, if I remember correctly, has signed up a line of credit for, I think, Seychelles, Mauritius, and a couple of other places, especially for defense cooperation. I think it also sits in very well with what India is trying to do under Atmanirbhar Bharat and the relevance for Africa. Just your thoughts on how we can build on that.
Thank you, Nilay. I think Atmanirbhar Bharat is a reflection of the policy transformation which is going on in India right now. This policy transformation is leading to technological transformation, giving a great boost to Indian defense industry. But the process of collaboration with Africa could actually be a two-way process. There are large amount of technology houses which developed reasonable amount of technology, in fact, high-tech technology in some parts of Africa. There are some collaboration which are going on already with companies which are based in India with these African companies. So the first kind of collaboration could be on the technological collaboration, where there could be joint development, taking a particular thought or a process or a technology to a product. The second would be that India's capability to have very competitive manufacturing processes in place. India is famous for frugal engineering, and our manufacturing is really, really very competitive, especially in high technology space. So there is a possibility that high technology, state-of-the-art weapon systems can be manufactured and supplied to African nations at affordable prices. I would like to underline the word affordable pricing. Yeah. And that is what we could do it in a very big way. And the third point for collaboration I would like, and this probably is the last point I would like to bring, is that there is a tremendous amount of very high quality armed forces institutes in the country, which provide, we are par with West Points of the world. We have our own National Defense Academy, we have Indian Military Academy, we have Staff College, we have NDC, and number of seats to the African continent could be increased in these institutions so that we could actually have a much greater, I would say, interaction on this particular critical part. Yeah. And the last point I would like to make before I hand it over to you is that there are a large amount of opportunities existing in number of segments. In artillery systems, armored vehicles, ships, offshore vessels, protected vehicles, small arms, ammunition, UAVs. I think there are plenty of opportunities which can be exploited. Exim Bank has provided, I would say, lines of credit. We also said that we do not leverage those lines of credit and we let the host nation pick on to what they want to do. But I think there are plenty of opportunities which can be really taken to fructification.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Colonel Bhatia. Rakesh, my apologies, but I'm going to push for a last question to you, but give you 60 seconds. But really one thing that Atsuko mentioned about, trade-related project financing, how can we create that particular access and how can technology overcome the current regulatory challenges that we may have?
Thank you. I think that's a very, very important question today, because as we speak, what's happening is that banks are increasingly getting disintermediated, and non-banking players are playing a very important role in this particular aspect of trade finance. And that brings a big challenge for the sector, because the regulators are also playing the catching up game in this regard. And therefore, their ability to comprehend the risk that is now the sector is dealing with is quite different. And therefore, the stakeholder engagement becomes extremely crucial. The traditional players have to also understand that their ability to come on one platform with a common requirement from the regulator is going to be very, very important. Because if you go to the regulators with multiple requirements because of your competing priorities, then it's going to lead the regulators to playing a role in different directions, which is not going to help the sector. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it's very important that the engagement becomes coherent and it's very, very focused and pinpointed towards the immediate problem and the resolution of that problem.
Yeah, Rakesh, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry, but we're out of time. As I think Harsha mentioned, we could speak about Indo-Africa collaboration for a long time. But I think there are some really important takeaways. Clearly, we need to invest in technology, we need to invest in infrastructure, but I think there is also a learning both sides. And I think we should look at things at global markets and not just where we collaborate together for global market and outreach, and not just look at markets in a confined sense of India and Africa. With that, I just wanted to thank my panelists and hand back to the studio. Thank you so much once again.
Of course, it is very important to capitalize on that bond between Africa and India. As Nilaya said at the beginning of the discussion, former President, SA President Nelson Mandela said India and Africa have been bound by a golden thread for decades. Thank you very much all.